Back with another episode of Natural AF. I'm your host, Isaac.
And I'm Alexa.
And this show is for you if you're interested in finding more freedom in your life, having a personal transformation, and finding out what it means to be truly natural AF. And this episode will go towards supporting that journey on a spiritual level. Might be a little bit challenging for some folks, might step on some toes, maybe a little confronting, but that always leads to growth.
Yeah, so today we have our beautiful friend Dotti on, who is such an amazing woman. I actually work with Dotti, helping her to organize workshops and talks and things, and she has so much wisdom to share on this topic. And I just want to preface this episode and say that this isn't to bash people that are religious or come from religious backgrounds.
Unless you're an asshole. I'm just kidding.
I mean, Isaac comes from, he was raised in a religious household, and and his family is absolutely beautiful. So it's not to say that this makes you a bad person or anything like that. However, if anyone is listening to this and is still under some form of religious control, and that might even be you were religious and you left, but you still are operating under a lot of the conditioning and the programming, I really would implore people that are still under religion in some way to listen to this and just really question whether you can see this showing up in your life at all, or within your religious community, because I'd be pretty shocked whether people didn't see anything at all like this within religious communities, because I think it's pretty prevalent throughout multiple religions, and not just Christian religion either.
Yeah. Yeah, and before you hit the comment section with, oh, they're just lost, let me give you all my proofs of my religion being the right one. We don't come from this from a standpoint of feeling like we don't know where we're going and we don't know. We're just looking for like someone to give us answers and all that stuff. I left that kind of cult feeling a long time ago. And I'm not challenging it just to be confrontational for confrontation's sake, but I can spot when something is holding me back. And when other people are creating a limited worldview and staying in it because it's scary to go outside of it, and we want this surety, we want this comfort knowing that if I just stay in this box, I don't have to worry about anything else outside of it. But for those of us that aren't afraid of what's outside of that, there's a lot of things that are really beautiful. There's some things that can be challenging and scary when you step outside of that comfort zone. But that's what we're all about. We're all about finding out what it means to be who we really are. What's the expanse? What's the limit to this? This is just one part of a much wider conversation about this topic that I hope to help unfold and expand on.
Yeah. And this is a longer episode, guys, because we spoke for almost 2 hours, and I reckon we could have gone for another 2 hours very easily. I think we all have so much to say on this topic. So for those that don't like the longer episodes, just speed it up or something and get through it. But for those that, really want to listen, like just dive in and go in with an open mind. Dotti has so much to share on this. And what I love about Dotti is she has her own personal experiences with this stuff, a lot of personal experiences. Like Dotti has the wildest stories that she only touched on some of them in this episode. But she also then goes and does the research. She actually goes and looks at, the history. We touch a little bit on the history of religion and the Catholic Church in particular. And she actually looks into this stuff and researches. And so you really get this really concrete understanding of exactly what she's talking about. So enjoy this, and don't take it too seriously either. We had fun with that.
Yeah, the more you challenge yourself, the more you can step into freedom, and you'll have all kinds of amazing things unfold in your life, like the challenge and overcoming that we had that Alexa did just a day or so ago.
Yeah. So Monday of this week, I had a court date. It was nothing major. It was just a traffic fine thing. It was a camera, got me wearing my seatbelt incorrectly. Here in New South Wales, that's a $450 fine and 3 demerit points off your license, which is pretty hefty for what it is. There's literally, you're not harming anyone. You're not putting anyone else at risk. But anyway, so I elected to take it to court because I did have a doctor's certificate. It was shortly after my surgery, which I've talked about very openly on this podcast. And long story short, my case got dismissed, and
we won, or she won.
I'm the winner. It was an open and shut case, really. So
it was fast. It was over so quick.
It was pretty funny actually, because Isaac went to move the car because it was all metered parking, and like he went out to move the car, and by the time he went and came back, it was done. Like I literally had stood up. So this was my first time. They say in the court representing yourself, but as we know, anyone that knows a little bit about common law, you're presenting yourself. And that was my first time doing that. And I didn't go in and not answer to the name and do all that stuff because I don't know that well enough. My aim in this was to just have the matter dealt with. And so I just played the game. You know, I answered to the name and whatever. But it really was over so quick. So first of all, I had applied for an annulment because I had missed the first court date because mail had been stolen and I actually didn't get the notice. She asked me some questions about that, annulled it straight away. She goes, yeah, it's annulled, whatever she said. So the annulment was done pretty quickly. And then she asked for the reason, that I wasn't wearing the seatbelt correctly. She looked through my driver's record, which is what the prosecutor puts in their paperwork. She looked at my driving record. She saw that there was no other offenses like that in my almost 20 years as a driver now. And took one look at my doctor's certificate and dismissed the case. And I got a Section 10, which is no charge recorded on your driving record. So it was amazing. It was such a great feeling.
Yeah, very proud of you for all that. You got to hold your ground at some point. Australia's become so controlling and corrupt because no one will say anything. People won't push back. They won't say no. They won't say, I actually deserve to be treated like a human and I'm going to stand up and share my voice and it will be heard. And to do it in a way that's just confident and controlled, not wildly going in there being like, you get out of my way. Like, and all that sassy little bullshit.
That
like,
never works. That. It never works when you're going there in anger and you're trying to fight the system. Like it never works.
The system thrives in that environment.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like when you go in and this is why it's actually, interesting that this has happened. Like, in this, we're releasing this episode this week because so much of what you do within that legal system and going through lawful processes to quote unquote exit the system for the people that are doing that in various ways. It really, what it all boils down to is knowing who you are. If you don't know who you are and you step into a courtroom, they will walk all over you. Like they know what they're doing. They know on a spiritual level what they're doing. And if you don't, taking those actions towards the lawful processes, they never really work out, or you'll do one thing and it'll work, but then like you keep taking it further and it doesn't pan out. Yeah. And for me going through this experience, don't get me wrong, I was nervous. Like when they called my name, I was the first one called. I was nervous and I could hear my voice was a bit shaky and I just was kind of trying to breathe and sort of and the way I was standing though, I was very grounded and I was just really grounding into my body. And I just held my gaze on the judge, on the magistrate, and I really didn't look away from her. And she only looked at me a couple of times, and it was like she didn't want to look at me, and she was busying herself with the paperwork and stuff, and then it was just in and out. And so I was really proud of myself for that because I wasn't scared of her or the system. And I think that's another really important thing is that when you actually know who you're dealing with and you understand these structures, they kind of don't hold the same power over you that they used to.
Yeah. I wish I knew the origin of this quote, but there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. I'm pretty sure that's like the Matrix.
Probably.
But it's so true. There's a future of more abundant freedom and less shame and guilt and people wagging their finger at you, telling you that you did this wrong and you did that wrong. And this episode is all about getting out from under all of that and just living a good life in alignment with the Creator, in alignment with creation, and just going direct to the source.
Yeah. And the good news didn't stop there on that day because we've got some amazing partnerships that are in the works, both here and in the States. So I'm not going to spill all the beans now, but keep an eye out on Natural Art Form. If you're not following us on socials, it's just at Natural Art Form on, where are we? Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Yeah. And we've got some really exciting things coming, and which we'll also announce on the podcast. But if you're not following us now, definitely do, because we've got these really awesome partnerships about to be announced. And of course, for our listeners, if you would like to buy any of our products, you'll get 10% off your entire order, no matter how many times you order. So head to naturalartform.com using the code naturalaf10 at checkout. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating. There is an option to leave there's a 5-star option. Please leave us 5 stars. If you don't like us, don't leave us 1 star, just don't leave us a rating. But yeah, if you listen and you love the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating. And on YouTube and Rumble, if you're watching there, please subscribe and leave us a comment. We love when people comment and let us know what they think of the episode or they share their stories. We love hearing from our listeners, so please do reach out.
All right. Well, thank you. And let's get into the episode.
Enjoy, guys. Dotti has over 40 years experience with inner healing and as an inspirational speaker. She is an integral part of the Living Free movement as a speaker and spiritual mentor. Dotti has a deep awareness of the spirit realm and accessing the power we have within for our own freedom and empowerment. Coming from a deep heart's desire for every human being to experience an inner standing of who they are, Dotti's unique, honest, and guided work helps others to discover who they truly are on a spiritual level. Through tapping into the spirit, Dotti uses her connection and insights to clear a path for people to find acceptance, healing, experience growth, and affirm their true path and who they are meant to be. Thanks so much for joining us today, Dotti.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, so good. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. It's going to be epic. Yeah,
it's going to be a good one. So before we dive in, because we've got so much to discuss on this topic, we just want to give you the floor and, share with our audience, for anyone that may not know you already, just, I guess, a little bit of your own journey and, some of the more significant life experiences that you've had that have shaped who you are today and the work that you do.
Wow. Okay. Well, I was brought up a Catholic and I rejected the whole, at the age of 7, just said to my mum, if I have to go through a priest to speak to God, well, God's not worth talking to. And she hit the floor and started doing her Hail Marys and her Our Fathers. And it was like, oh my gosh. But as a child, I was very God aware, but did not accept the mainstream, process on how you connect with God. So basically, I did my life. And then at the age of 23, I actually had an encounter with God. I had a face-to-face experience, and it was a transfiguration. It was a transformational. I was literally one person 1 minute and this completely different person the next. And, in between that age of 7 and 23, I had a really hard life. My mum was, cruel. She was abusive. She was verbally abusive. So, you can imagine that shuts you all down, as a child. And really it made me hard and it made me angry. And I had a knack of really pulling people apart very quickly with my words, because that's what my mum used to do to me. And so at 23, when I had this connection, and it was a really beautiful thing. It was really simple. There wasn't this religious formulas. It wasn't, have to go through all these rituals and ceremonies, to try and find God. All I did was ask him to come into my life. So it was like I knew of him, but then I asked him to come into my life. And that's when this spiritual connection happened. And it was like all the realms opened up in the spiritual. I was seeing all sorts of things. I was seeing the angelic. I was seeing the demonic. I was seeing heaven. I was seeing the galaxies. Like, it was just one wild trip. And, with no drugs, no alcohol. And it just literally changed my life. And that has been my foundation for the rest of my life. That is my truth. And like I would have visions and I would, see the future and it would come to pass. And I'm sharing these experiences with people in the church and they were going, oh, you can't do that. You're not meant to be able to do that. And I'm like, what? Because it is real. It is very real. It's realer to me than the things here on this earth. And I would just end up having to not share a lot of stuff of my experiences and the way that God would guide me, and I had to learn things along the way, but I like learning. So, I'm always digging for more in who I am, but who God is for me. And that's been the transformation through my life and dealing with the blockages of, how we see God. So this is how it worked for me, how I saw my mum and my dad reflected into my relationship with God. So I had two things happening. I had a mum that didn't want me and was basically always telling me that I was worth nothing. And I had a dad, lovely man, but he was really passive. So I was seeing God through those perspectives because everything you are is how you view life, how you view relationships, whether they're in the spirit or in the natural. So I had to go through the process of dealing with those wrong concepts and mindsets so that I could then come into a richer relationship with God. And that was a big part of my journey. And some of those were really key events that changed and grew me in my relationship with God, because the number one thing is that relationship. When you have a great relationship with God, you don't suffer from insecurity. You don't come under fear. You know who you are, because I see myself as he sees me. Anything contrary to how he sees me is a lie. And this is where people stay stuck under the lies that we've been fed through the programming and particularly through a religious spirit. Doesn't matter and this is my life experience, it doesn't matter what church I stepped into, there was always the same conflict because they didn't like you being free. They didn't like you being empowered and have this connection with God that they can't manipulate or then even, kind of orchestrate the spiritual encounters that you have through their formulas and through their teaching. And this is where I would always end up hitting the brick wall with them and, often going, look, you need to leave, because I'm teaching or sharing the heart and the truth of who we are. And that then is showing up their control, because churches are set up with a hierarchy that you are there to fulfill that pastor or that priest's vision and purpose. So we've created this structure that we, the people, are disempowered. And this is something that I stand up for, because it's so wrong. It's so wrong, because we are all called to do something. We all have a purpose and a plan, and it's certainly not to sit in pews and, hand over our money so they can then live in their $1 million mansions and drive their Ferraris and have all their holiday homes and yachts and all that sort of stuff. And I mean, I know a lot of these people personally, and I used to go, this is wrong. This is not right, because I know in those congregations or in those gatherings, there are single mums that are struggling to put food on the table. They can't even pay their rent. They can't pay their rego, but they are still commanded and enticed to put money in the plate to keep the church going.
Right.
Yeah, it's not it's not all that it seems when you look at what the Christian church is supposed to be. And I'll try to be as diplomatic as possible, because sometimes I can be a little bit of a bull in a china shop and just be like, and just make claims or say something. But I'm trying to like reach people that have a religious background, a Christian background, and open them up to some of the things. Because it's not about planting seeds of doubt in something that means something so much to people. It's about, like what you said, empowering them and that's the whole purpose of this show, is about getting back to who we really are, who we truly are on all levels: spiritual, mental, physical, emotional. Yeah. And I think for me, seeing all the problems in the churches, not just some problems like, this church is a little bit stuffy, or this one is, there's really sick abusers in positions of power in a lot of churches. Mm. Just that fact alone is enough to be like, hey, there's some problem here. All this spiritual stuff, it doesn't matter how many times you go to church. If you go every single week, twice a week, 3 times a week, you can do that, and you can potentially still end up in a situation where the person leading your group, leading your church, is full of shit. Like I had a pastor growing up who later came out as gay. His wife left him. And I don't know how dark it gets in his life, but the fact that his son is also looking like he's gay, there might have been some inappropriate stuff between him and his boy. It typically, from the people I've talked to, typically that kind of stuff starts with childhood and abuse of some kind. Mm-hmm. And I know in my family, like there's been people in churches that have had people in my family that have had things happen to them in churches, both on the Catholic side and on the Protestant Baptist side, that should never happen in any church. Mm. It's such an alarming thing that this kind of stuff has been going on for so long, and everyone just buries their head in the sand and acts like, oh no, we're the real church. We have all the answers. We have the truth. We have the good. We have the actual Bible. We have the right translation. And it's like, there's a rotten seed at the core of this that isn't being addressed. And there is some kind of dark spiritual thing that I think you're prepared to shed some light on, because it's not all love and light in the church. It's like there's some really, really dark shit going on.
Absolutely. The thing is, we've got to look at history and how the church was formed was through Constantine. And he, this is in Rome, and they've got all the different gods. Okay, they worship all the different gods and deities. And then, we've got the Pope Sylvester I. He comes along. Constantine gathers with him because he could not control the empire, because true Christianity, or, that the belief of God started to rise up, and they couldn't control it. So then what they had to do is they came in with the Pope, and the Constantine, who represents government, and they joined religion and government together, and they made the Catholic Church, so to speak. They built the Vatican, and that is the root of the whole issue. So, when I used to go into these churches, and they are a little bit, like wow type of thing. But I used to look at the structure and the statues and the sculpture and the artwork, and it never sat with me. It was like, why have they got demons, on the structures overlooking from the towers? And why do they have the green man in all of their facades and all that sort of thing? And why have they got demonic symbols on the floor? And, why is the church facing a certain way, and all these things? And as you unpack that, which is what we're looking to do in a workshop, it is all pagan religion that they have presented as one religion. Even the way they've presented, Mary is not what we think it is. everything has a double meaning. And this comes from, it comes out of Babylon. This is exactly their whole tactic and plan. So Constantine and, the Pope Sylvester come together and they combined forces, and then they have a council that decides what will make up the Bible. Now, isn't it funny that we have 66 books in the Bible?
Yeah.
Right? So this is where we've got to start questioning and start looking at the symbolisms around us, the structure that we're in, what they're actually saying, because they, as we know with legislation, what the word they use and what we think it means are two different things. And this is where we get hoodwinked into contracting with them without realizing what's actually happening. So, the religion, the spirit of religion. So let me just backtrack here. So there are five main organizations that are in control of the world. Okay. Or let me just say they think they are, because we can change this. That is the Vatican. That is the Freemasons. That is the Mormons. And that is Satanism and the Cabal. And this is why, in the last couple of years, we're hearing about the Cabal. People are having conversations. They're starting to expose it. Now, there's a lot of hierarchy in all of these ranks. They all pretend that they're not connected, but they are all working together. The same as government departments are all working together. So, and behind that, we have some very strategic principalities that are operating throughout all of that. And this is what we've got to become aware of, because when you know what you're dealing with, you then know you're standing in truth and not being brought into the lies.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Yeah, I was wondering, you mentioned some of the words that they use that don't mean the same thing that we think it means. Do you have any examples of that? And maybe starting with principalities, like what does that mean? And then if you have any other examples.
Sure. So I'm going to use some scripture here because although, the scriptures were coerced by man, there is a lot of spiritual truths in the Bible. And there's a lot of, principles that I live by because they've resonated with my spirit. I know that they're truth. There's some things I read and I go, yeah, I don't want a part of that. And what I have always challenged is I find a lot of religions, or for those that are apostolic or, Pentecostals, that where they have prophets and all that sort of thing, they're always bringing Old Testament examples. Now, when you read the Old Testament, it is always punishment. It's always, if you don't do this, then God's going to do this to you. And it's never sat with me because that's not who I know God to be. And also, I'm going to again go with the Jesus and him dying on the cross and what we're taught that he represents. Then we're in a whole new way of living. Right? So scripture says he's the way, the truth, and the life. But we're not seeing the truth and the life in people's lives when they are under religion because they are disempowered. So these are the things that what I find to be spiritual truth is the fruit of it. So anything that makes me feel like I'm not good enough or, they're controlling or it's man agenda or their ego, right? That is religion. So the principalities of religion is, simply the higher ranking. So in Ephesians 5, it says, we don't fight flesh and blood. we're fighting principalities, powers, and authorities. Now, that is a ranking. That is a hierarchy of how the demons or Lucifer or entities or evil, whatever word you want to call it, is how they function. But then we've got to turn it around and we've got to realize that in Genesis, it says that God gave man dominion and authority on the earth. So how the principalities, powers, and authorities have worked is that they keep us suppressed, they keep us hoodwinked, they keep us under, under circumstances, so we never rise up to be who we were designed to be. And that's the battle that we're in.
Yeah.
And that's what we're coming out from under. And that's why the messages of truth, the life, the way, is what we need to bring. And that's what sets people free. This is what scripture says. It sets people free. So, my gauge is, am I coming under bondage or am I being set free? Does this make my life better or will this make my life worse? Because these are the contracts that we are offered every day.
Yeah. And I actually love that you use scripture, Dotti, because like for me, I didn't grow up religious. I was we were talking about this yesterday, actually, Isaac and my mum wasn't, like my parents weren't new age at all. And I was christened as a child, like my dad's side is Serbian Orthodox. So I was christened and my grandma's really religious, but has never pushed it on anyone. And I grew up sort of tending towards new age, but not really, because mum kind of introduced us to a lot of different religions and philosophies and kind of told us to take the best of all of them. But for me, there was so much that didn't sit right about religion. Just from a very young age, it always felt a little bit culty to me. Like it always felt like this segregation to some degree. Yeah. And it just there was so much about it that didn't sit right with me. And so I've always had this really strong aversion to reading the Bible and all of that. But in the last few years, especially, I have learnt more about it and the truths that are within it. And I think it's so important to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there is so much spiritual truth in there. However, discernment is so important because it has been so corrupted. And I always say this, we have no idea what the original Bible was. At this point in time, we have no idea what the original scriptures were and what's been changed, how much has been changed, what's been taken out. So I think it's a really important text to read, especially in this time that we're currently in, because I think a lot can be gleaned from what's in there, both on the side of truth, but also the things that they put in there that are trying to condition us and, like you said, take us away from who we truly are.
Yeah. And this is where, if you're new to this, the New Testament is definitely the better place to read, because and the reason I say that, and going back to, Jesus as an example, as a representation of, walking in right relationship with God, and the things that he did are the things that we can do in that right relationship. Yeah. So, this is where this to me is where the resurrection power of what he is saying in the Bible. And it's always, if you're new or you've just come into this, reading the New Testament is definitely the better place to be, because we're in a covenant. So, they talk about the old covenant or the Mosaic covenant, but then we're talking about the new covenant. And to me, I look at it like this. The Old Testament was a contract. You do this, then God will do that. If you don't uphold your contract end, then you're going to get punished. It's like that in our contracts, our written contracts that we do here today. If you're a renter and you don't uphold your end of that contract, they'll kick you out, right? But if you do the right things, then you're okay. But a covenant is very different. And this is what that a lot of churches won't teach, because it actually eliminates them because they need us to go to them to get to God. That's their whole structure. You know, like, you've got to come to church, you've got to do this, you've got to, you've got to pray, and it's all wrong. I'm saying it. It's all wrong. It has a pinch of truth with a whole lot of manipulation and a whole lot of evil wrapped up in it.
Yeah.
So, knowing that we're in a new covenant. So a covenant is that God has already done everything. And it doesn't matter what you do, that will not change. So let me go to the fact that God has unconditional love. So it doesn't matter what you do, you will always be loved by God. You will always be accepted. He will never leave you or forsake you. These are his covenants, right? He's asking us to open our eyes, open our hearts and ears to the things of the Spirit. And this is available to all of us. So I've come across for years so many people like, oh, I can't hear God, I can't see in the Spirit. And I look at them, I go, why not? Because they are believing a lie, right? And sometimes they have participated in rituals and ceremonies that have blocked that. It shuts it down. So then not only have they gone another step further, they now put things in our food to shut us down. And, if I can throw some what in there if you want right now, but part of the what is in the satanic side of things, they have a structure. Do you want me to go into this, guys?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no holding back here, Dotti.
Okay, so there is a structure, and the structure is, like we've heard about the children that are in the tunnels and breeders, all that sort of thing. Okay, so when a breeder has a child, the hierarchy will see what kind of talents or giftings that child is born with. We're all born with it, okay? So they'll discern what kind of, and they will discern what position that child is going to take in the future. Okay, so that's where you've got your elite type of aspect and the different families that we're all aware of. But then if they deem you as disposable, because that's what they use, the word disposable, those children are then set up to go into sex trafficking, slavery, once they've used them, because they're about making money. So once they've used them for that and they've passed that date, then they are used for sacrifices. So when they are then used for sacrifices, there's a couple of things that happen. They will either sell parts of them, right, for demonic rituals. And then when they finish doing that, they actually burn and cremate the remains, and they can do two things. They'll either turn them into a diamond, or they are sold as food filler.
Ugh.
Yeah. Yeah, we know this is true with it's called the HEK 293, I think. It's human embryonic kidney cell. That's just one that they have a patent for that we know. And 293 was the number of iterations it took to find the right molecule that is produced by this kidney cell. And so they've used it as food flavorings, for sweeteners, for creating something that tastes sweet with less sugar. And this is like, I know this stuff because it's a fact. Like there's scientific papers on it, on how they use aborted kidney cells from infants.
Those aborted
for food flavorings.
Yeah, those aborted fetus cell lines. It's definitely out there, and it's not that hard to find. And they have these particular cell lines for different vaccines that they put them in, and it's really, really sick stuff. But I'm glad you brought this up, Dotti, because and for anyone that might not, because this stuff is quite unbelievable, especially if you're hearing it for the first time. It's actually, it took me quite a while, a few years, till I could actually even look at that stuff, because it's so disturbing. Yeah.
But I just want to add this, to the fact of why they do that. It says in Scripture, he who eats human flesh is then accursed.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is their constant, agenda, is to constantly keep us cursed, keep us out of coming into right relationship with God.
Yeah.
So that's their agenda.
Yeah. And absolutely. And so for anyone that is wanting to hear, like, we've had Rachel Vaughan on our podcast. It was episode 18 for anyone that hasn't listened to that. She talks about her experience. She was born into a bloodline family. I highly recommend listening to Max Lowen. She's done a ton of interviews. She was also born into a bloodline family. Her uncle actually ran the tunnels under the Vatican. So she's got a really interesting story. Wow. And I would actually love to get more into this, because you touched on it a little bit even with your experience, Dotti, about this. There's so many ways that they try and disconnect us. Like you said, it's the food, it's so many things now, because it's the government, it's all the 5G and all this stuff they're doing with what's it called, EMFs and all that kind of thing. But I want to speak specifically on trauma, and because there are a lot of ways that societally they keep us in trauma, but within religion specifically, because you touched on just your experience in, like, your family dynamic, and how that kind of, that was kind of how you saw your connection with God. But in your opinion, and like with what you've seen in churches, what are some of the ways they keep people in trauma? Because one of the things that's just coming to mind is how they view Jesus on the cross. Like, that's how they remember, of all the beautiful things, all the beautiful stories of Jesus, that's how they remember him dead on the cross. And to me, that's keeping people in a state of trauma when they're sitting and that's what's up in front of them.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And that actually, the man on the cross is actually representing another contract.
Yeah.
And it's keeping people in that state. And this is where everything about the church and religion, because it's a religious spirit that's operating, that's the principality over it, is to keep people bowed down. It's to keep us shut down mentally, emotionally, spiritually, absolutely, and to keep us in trauma, to keep us in that place of never being good enough. We're never worthy. It doesn't matter how many of their teachings that you would go to, you never make it. So this is where they keep us in being unsuccessful every step of the way. We're never good enough. We're always called sinners. We have to go to confession. The more you go to confession, and I used to look at that and I go, I'm not telling you nothing. And I used to make up shit.
Right.
So it's like, it is just such a fast. But people buy into it. And then what happens is they create people that become religious. So when I say that, all of a sudden, everything's, you can't do this, you can't do that. If you don't do this, then you're going to be punished. And parents can actually punish their kids, in the sense of, if they've made a mistake, they're continually punishing them for their mistake. And this is not God. This is not the heart of God. This is not the one that created us. It is such a misrepresentation, and it keeps people bound. It keeps them in a life of lack in every aspect, in a life of trauma, that in a life of fear, which is their biggest tactic, is that everything is fear-based. Everything is manipulative. And I'm going to say this, but to me, that is just pure witchcraft. And that is exactly what they participate in. We see these grand churches, but there is stuff going on underneath that human sacrifices. You know, they have priestesses that come in and do all sorts of stuff. They've got the priests coming in and doing all sorts of stuff. And we've seen in the last couple of years, you know, the Catholic Church being exposed for their pedophilia. And, you know, if you look at the history, the true history, you know, there's always sacrifices, there's punishment, and the punishment is often death. And this is where, again, this is the state of the world. And now they're trying to tell us that, you know, because we use plastic containers that we're destroying creation, but they're the ones that have been destroying it forever anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
We are part of creation. They want to destroy us. And if we, the people, that, you know, don't rise up and say enough, it will keep doing what it's doing. This is where, you know, when good people do nothing, evil will prevail. And we've got to come out of that fear and go, nah, we're going to stand united, because they can pick one or two off very easily. And they do. But if there's numbers stand together, awakened, aware, then they're outnumbered, especially if we know how to stand in the spirit and how to do things in the spirit collectively.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. So one of the things that Jesus talked about when discerning, like you mentioned, is the fruits. By the fruits, you will know them. So the work, the thoughts, the intentions, the habitual acts that people do will show up in the world. Even if they do it in private and secret, the result of that will show up, manifest in the physical world. And one of the things that put the nail in the coffin, so to speak, of me ever stepping in and going to church again was during COVID. Straight away, because I've like you, I've always felt connected to God, never felt like I needed to go through any man to get to God. And as I've been working and I've lived, you know, interesting life, had made all kinds of mistakes, but never felt separated from God, even after making so-called mistakes.
Yeah.
So I felt during COVID right away, it was the first time I saw any kind of Chinese videos of people falling over. I was like, it's fake. These videos are produced. This is a fear narrative. I was ready for it. And I just watched in disbelief that, I don't know what the percentage, it's at least 99% of all religious organizations around the world all closed their doors, all bowed to the government ahead of God. Like they put government ahead of the actual creator of this realm and obeyed that, put fear into their population, put masks on children, even though the quote unquote science said there wasn't really any risk to children of spreading it or getting sick from whatever the hoax that they calculated. And the fact that there was no discernment or very little discernment in these churches showed me that they were blind. This is not the place to go if you want if you want truly wise leaders that are connected to the source of all creation, the source of all wisdom and knowledge, Creator God. These people are not connected to him in the way that many people hope and think they are.
That's right. And they're actually corporations, guys. They are a money laundering front. They don't pay taxes, and they get away with a whole lot. And even if they've got pastors or priests that are pedophiles, they just move them around. Yeah. There's no consequences for their actions. And I think it's time that they are held accountability, because this is how they've camouflaged it. They've used the word grace. You know, we put grace on things. Well, we don't put grace on evil.
No.
Let's just put it that bluntly. And that's what we were taught. Oh, you know, you've got to forgive. Well, we're not going to forgive evil. It's time that we said enough is enough, and we confronted it, and we don't tolerate it. So, you know, there's a lot of good things that came out of COVID. You know, there really is.
Yeah.
And it was a very interesting time, especially those that didn't buy into the BS. And that's where it created a movement in a sense that those that were awake and those that were aware, or those that questioned, started to gather together, and communities were birthed out of it, and people started to fulfill, break out of the spell and started going, hang on a minute, and ask questions. And the one thing that I'm always teaching people, doesn't matter where, always ask questions. You can ask God any question. Well, that's what religion has stopped. They go, oh, you can't question God. Mm-hmm. So therefore you can't question me because I'm God's voice. I'm God's man for the hour. And right. I'm sorry, but I go bullshit to you because I've got a direct line to God and I don't need to go through you. And this is breaking this guru hierarchical bullshit that we are under and challenging it.
Yeah.
And saying enough is enough. And this is what we've got to come out of. The relationship with God is very, very simple. And they complicate it. But it's very pure and simple. And it's basically, love God and let God love you. Yeah. A lot of people have trouble letting God love them because of their traumas, because of their belief systems, the way that they've been programmed, the way that they've have been taught who God is. And these are the things that need to be corrected so that people can come into freedom. They can come into liberty. They can come into truth, and they can have a life, and a life that's abundant. It's got good relationships. It's got people that genuinely care. It's amazing how many churches you go into that if you don't play by their rules, you're excommunicated. Yeah. And then you see people who you think were your friends for 5 years or 10 years, and they see you in the street and they turn the other way and won't even talk to you. And I go, wow, like that's how programmed they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd love to get some more into that because it's just this is the stuff, whether it's religion, because you can apply this to so many things. It's when you see like clear contradictions that you know that it's not in truth, because even what you were talking about earlier with the contracts and basically what you were saying, it's like your terms and conditions, right? Yep. And that's what religion is based on, is God will only love you if you these are the terms and conditions.
Yeah.
And then because then you said after that is that God loves us unconditionally. That's what unconditional love is. That is the love of God. And it's universal. So already there's your contradiction, and there's so many within religion. So I'd love to get more into like the conditioning, because I think Isaac and I were just having this conversation yesterday about there's very clear religious programming that you see show up very commonly in people that have been raised in church, and really doesn't matter what church. Like we were talking yesterday about so there's a lot of people pleasing that happens. There's a lot of, the fear programming is huge, and they do that in a lot of different ways. Poverty programming. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Dotti, and what you see most commonly, and how people can start to be more aware if they're in, religious communities. How can they start to see this within their own lives?
Well, part of it, like some of the conditioning that I've seen firsthand is that a lot of pastors tend to play matchmakers. So they're telling people who they can and can't marry. If they're going to their finances, what they can and can't do with their finances. Like, guys, this should be screaming red flags right now.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and it's like, what the heck? Now, I have been involved in churches, and I have held pastoral positions, and but I've always, tried to bring people into their divine connection with God. That's just who I am, and I'm never going to apologize for that ever again. And part of what I found is anything that is contrary to your free will, Anything that manipulates you either through guilt or shame or fear is, again, witchcraft, because God does never operate out of controlling you. This is what people don't realize. Everything about God is about free will. He gave us free will. The reason that he gave us free will is he didn't want a bunch of zombies that would go, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir. Yet this is exactly what religion does. And this is exactly what Lucifer wants, right? So everything is about free will. So if I ever feel the intention or the frequency of manipulation, of guilt or shame or condemnation, which is a big one that the church uses, I just step back and go, I'm not going to be a part of this. If anything that I do is always done because I want to, right? So the connection that I have with God, the relationship I have with God is because I want that relationship. It's not because I have to have it. I was never in a place of I need God, you know. I just came to this decision because it was from my heart. It was genuinely, yeah, I want God in my life. I didn't even know what that looked like. But it was just a point of time where I just went, I want God in my life, and whatever that looked like. And I tell you, I was hungry to know how to have this relationship with him, who he was for me, and find out who I am. And the most beautiful thing in that, you know, that moment of time when I was 23 was the first time I felt unconditionally loved. I felt fully accepted when the 23 years before that, I never felt any of that. And that can only come from God. See, everything in this world cannot satisfy the hole that you have within you. And everyone's got it. So people will try and fill it with drugs. They'll try and fill it with sex. They'll try and fill it with parties. They'll try and fill it with alcohol. They'll try and fill it with relationships. But none of that works because you are looking from outside of you to material things or physical beings to fill that hole. It needs to come directly from your creator. And that's where it's so simple, guys. It's just asking God to come into your life and then walking with him in it. It's a 24 hours, 7 days a week, you know, awareness that God is in everything with me and I'm in him. So scripture says I have unlimited access to everything that he has to offer. So my journey is my soul learning to tap into my spirit's geniusness, to tap into all the wisdom that God has on offer. So this is where it's the role reversal. Religion is all about mind. You know, it's the mind, it's the physical. God is about the spiritual. And then the mind, then the soul comes into alignment.
Yeah.
So once we break this mind control, this spell of not being good enough, trying to work our way into heaven, that's the other one. Oh, when you die, then you'll experience heaven. What a load of crock.
Yeah.
You can experience right here, right now. You can experience the fullness of God. You can, you know, move in the spirit. You have the spirit with you. And like I said, Jesus is the perfect representation. Now, if you make a mistake, doesn't matter, does it, Isaac? You just dust it off. You go, whoops, I made a mistake. You know, a sorry is always a great way to restart. An apology always clears the slate and we can start afresh. Every morning is a new day. You know, he's new every morning. So this is what we can step into. But so many of us through religion are dragging our past because they're constantly flogging us about our past. I don't know about you, Isaac, and you may have witnessed this, but they'd have this bikie guy or this, prostitute that they would get up to share their testimony, right?
Right.
And they're talking about their life and their, all the things that they did and the nitty gritty, and everyone's like, whoa. And then at the end, and then they go, and then I accept Jesus. Mm-hmm. I'm like, why are we glorifying the person's life beforehand, and then we tack on God or Jesus at the end? What about let's glorify the people that never had to go through that? They never had to go through hell to then come into, this incredible relationship with God. No one ever sings those praises. You know why? Because it's too boring to the religious spirit. It's not nitty and gritty. It's like, come out of being sacrificed and all this sort. You go, oh my gosh, there's a programming right there.
Mm. And that's another thing. Sorry, just quickly on that. That's another thing that it's like this keeping people in trauma, because when they tell these stories and they get into such great detail, and it's like that amount of detail is not necessary.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is where I go, wow, let's just, let's glorify the evil that has happened to that person, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
And we they used to put them on a traveling ministry, and every town they're sharing this story and reliving their lives, and then tacking on the end of it. Now, I'm not dismissing that people have gone through a lot. I know lots of people. I know people that have come out of covens, and I've journeyed with them on how to break out of that, and their programming is pretty intense. And what they have to do to come out of that. I'm not dismissing that, but this is where we have to look at why are we, elevating this trauma. And what I've found, a lot of the fruit of those people, they never stay. They never stay connected with God. They actually often go back to their old life, because there's never been allowed to be a proper healing that sets them free from those things. Yeah. Because a lot of those things or actions actually open them up to entities and things that start to control their life, or they start to see God through the trauma and realize, and then they can't connect.
Yeah. Yeah. That's been what I've noticed in the church as well. I grew up non-denominational / evangelical. I've been to Pentecostal churches. I've seen, just all kinds of stuff from people, speaking in tongues and dancing, but then some of it has an authentic feel to it, and a lot of it's very performative.
Yeah.
And
when it's authentic, I tell you, it's powerful. It's awesome. Light language or speaking in tongues is a very powerful tool.
Yeah.
And I highly recommend it because it does give you clarity. It does give you, when your mind's all, what am I going to do? It just settles you, and it gives you a clear path, and it taps you into wisdom. So I'm all for it. And when things are done authentically and with the pure intention, to me, it's like I have an audience of one, and that is God. He sees all, he's in all, nothing's hidden. And it amazes me that in religion, they think they can hide their actions, and then they put on this pompous religious facade, and people are buying it. And I've seen it time and time again. I've been able to look at people, and I've looked at them, and I'm going, man, you're in an adulterous situation. You're not even being true and integral to your family. So why would I listen to you on what you're sprouting from a pulpit just because you think you're the man? Mm-hmm. So this is what we've got to come out from under. And it's the same with our politicians. It's the same hierarchical thing. Oh, well, Albanese said it, so it must be true. I'm like, oh, my gosh, like, wake up. I want to.
Yeah. Yeah. Why would they lie? But they also just don't know a lot of times. Some of these people do know, and they're very dangerous. Some of them are just operating out of ignorance and out of programming. a few things that I've learned through my own curious nature. I've been reading the Bible and prophecies, end time prophecies, since I was little. I used to bring a little New Testament Bible with me to elementary school. At age 7, I'd be reading it with my friends and like talking about, oh, the world's going to end. I used to have dreams about this stuff as a kid, knowing that I would have some sort of role to play in these quote unquote end times. And then just out of my own curiosity and actually reading the Bible that all these people preach and hold up as the word of God, I realized there's a lot going on in there that is very empowering and freeing. And some of it's very tricky. Like there is words that have been changed that haven't been addressed for hundreds, maybe thousands of years, that have completely put the church, big C church, little C church, whatever, on a different trajectory. And those were implemented by men. And I grew up my whole life being told that man can't change the Bible because God is so powerful, he would never let it happen, that man cannot alter the scripture or they'll be cursed. Well, they've altered it. They've altered the King James Bible. They've made an entirely new scripture for the Mormons, and they've made an entirely new one for the Jehovah's Witness. And the Catholics have a different Bible, and they've got different books in it that the Christians don't have. The Bible has been changed so many freaking times, and I've read most of them. Like I've read all these different books, and I've seen things that I'm just like, I was told this wasn't a thing. I can't even keep track of how many translations of the Bible there are. And I'm not saying don't read the Bible. I'm saying read it, but have your direct connection to God in play when you're reading it, and you'll learn, because the Bible isn't like a mystical book that I've been told it's a living text. You read it, it's the spirit in you that makes it come alive. If you're blind, you read the Bible as a blind person. If you're connected to God and you can see and you read the Bible, you'll see some stuff that your pastor probably has never seen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is where we need to come away from one person supposedly having the truth. We're all meant to have the truth. Remember? Yeah. Jesus is the way, the life, and the truth. So, and again, he's a representation of being in perfect relationship with God, and then that flowing through him. And that's available to all of us. That's what we were designed to be. And that's what we need to come into. Like sometimes I go, imagine a world where everyone we don't even need to speak. We already know what you would need or what I would need. And we just flow together. I think that'll be a beautiful day. But we've got to stop, letting religion and corruption and, this, to bring down this hierarchy. Now, we still need structure, right? And I want to say this, there are some absolutely beautiful people in churches. It's just such a shame that they are being misled and hoodwinked. And I just like want to call them out from underneath the BS and call them into truth, because that, there are some beautiful, beautiful people. But, so I'm not, it's not everyone in one bag, but I'm targeting the religiousness. I'm targeting that spirit that then controls these people and has them totally blind. Yeah. To what Scripture says, and then they use Scripture to condemn. That's the other thing. They, you come into those organisations and then they're condemning you with the Scriptures, and I'm like, but that's not what the Scripture means, right? Because they're reading it from their head. So, and they can twist it, and like I think there's actually, Isaac, 4,000 different interpretations of the Bible.
Wow.
Yeah, sounds about right. It's
so,
a lot.
It's full on. And, there's certain ones that resonate with me, and then there's ones that I go, nah. And part of that is that the intent that's being written, they're being written with. And the one that came out about 10 years ago, which was called The Passion, and Brian Smith, I think, is the one that, if memory serves me right, is the one that interpreted the original Aramaic into English. If you read that Bible, it reads very, very different.
Oh, I bet.
Like especially the Song of Solomon is very, very different. It just opens you up into this incredible encounter of, the true relationship with God, because the words that we've been condemned with, when they come into their true written value, they mean something completely different. And that was a really, another beautiful journey that I went on. And like for me, because I was churched and I was, this is the word, that sort of thing. But underneath it was like, but God just wants to connect. And I was always about the supernatural, because the spirit is a supernatural realm. And then when I turned 50, God just said to me, I'm going to get rid of all the religion that you have come connected with, and I'm going to change. I tell you, the last 10 years have been amazing, and taken me into this deeper relationship with him and deeper understanding of what the spirit is and how God actually is for us, not against us.
Yeah.
And so there's, religion, there's always criticism. There's also always a spirit of suspicion, and anybody that is contrary to them, they're full of demons. Well, I'm learning there's more demons in churches than there is outside of churches. And so this is, there's more entities, because there's ego and there's control and there's manipulation and there's guilt and there's shame and conduct. These are all energies and entities that people then come under. And you know what? They bring it home with them, some of them. So then they're bringing up their children in this punishment way, that then the kids, as soon as they're old enough, will rebel and run away. And I don't blame them.
Yeah.
Because it isn't life.
Yeah. I love this, this conversation. This particular thing brought me up to, so going back to the fruits, right? If there was actual freedom from these groups, so all my brothers and I have all had problems with pornography our whole lives, or once we became adolescents. In the church, they handle it in a bunch of different ways, mostly through shame. The least effective way to break any kind of addiction. I mean, there's probably people that have been able to like shame their way out of it, but very rarely. It keeps you trapped because it's not the truth. It's not empowering. And like you pointed out earlier, if it doesn't bring you empowerment, it's not true. It's not aligned with who you actually were with God. And it took an outcast comedian, Owen Benjamin, to start breaking the pornography spell and what was actually wrong with it. And it goes directly against what all these evangelical churches believe, which is like, it goes, there's a weaponization of it, mostly comes from Jewish people of power. And the Israeli army has actually used pornography as a weapon to take over Gaza and other places. It's like, it's a freaking weapon. Okay. Now that I know that, I've never heard that. It's a weapon deployed by man, guided by these spirits. I've never heard anything like that in the church. And I've gone through a lot of different churches and all that stuff. But I wonder if there's any other things like that you've noticed where people are enslaved and are staying bound, and the answers that you've picked up directly from God are so simple, or just the truth is so much freeing. And meanwhile, you've got people that make entire church groups around this same thing, and they all just stay stuck, like they're permanent, like alcoholics, in these groups where they just perpetuate it.
Yeah. Look, can I just touch on this? Even the AAA, Alcoholics Anonymous,
Mm-hmm.
that is a 10-step program that keeps them as alcohols. Right? So you get a bunch of all these people that have a similar problem, and there's spirits attached to this, literally, not just in a bottle. And they gather together, and then they end up befriending someone that has the same problem and the same entity, like a familiar spirit, and they become best friends, and then they're back in the same hole again, because they're never dealing with the root issue. So root issues in your life is absolutely paramount that you need to deal with, whether it comes through a trauma, whether it comes through sexual abuse. It can come through something that you saw as a child, Isaac, that then planted that seed of that pornography. The kids are copying it in their cartoons, in their TV shows, where adults are copying it through, the things that they watch on Netflix. Like some of the stuff on Netflix now, like they're doing sacrifices on TV and showing you how they do it in a TV show. And I can't watch it. I've got to get away from it because I don't want to be a part of it. I'm not afraid of it, but it's because it's not who I am. I would never engage with it, but I'm going, man, this is what's programming, television, television,
right.
And this is where we're being programmed, and our kids are more and more sat in front of TV on their phones, watching programs that have got underlying programming.
Yeah.
It's almost like being MK altered.
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's, part of you wants to save everybody, but again, it's free will. You can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And that's very, very true. Because again, it's free will. And God will never go against our free will. Will he, I've found that there are things that if I don't learn the lesson the first time, then he'll give me another chance to learn it. But I've just taught myself, learn it the first time, Dot.
Yeah. Well, we're big believers in that too, I think, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, that life will keep presenting you with the lessons that you need to learn. If you don't learn it the first time, it'll come up again. And what tends to happen, it kind of has this snowball effect where the opportunities that come will tend to get, I don't want to say worse, but maybe more intense and harder to deal with the more you just keep ignoring it and not seeing it for what it is. And I just wanted to bring up too, because what Isaac just shared reminded me of this too. And another thing that, I guess more so as I got older, where I just saw like there was something wrong with religion, is that, like you said, a lot of people that, I'll use Isaac's mum as an example because she goes to church, I think, a couple of times a week. She's very, very connected to God. But then again, I'll preface this with, you can't always conflate, religion with connection to God, because there are people in religion that just go, they do the things, but they're actually really horrible people, or they just live their lives they're alcoholics, they're addicted to pornography, they have horrible relationships, they treat their kids like shit. Like I see that a lot. Yeah. But then I have seen like people like Isaac's mum, like my grandmother, so devoutly religious, but you can tell they have this true connection to God because they don't judge anyone for what they believe. They don't push their religion onto anyone else. They actually live their lives as truly good people, like genuinely good people. And so I think that if that's what people need to have that connection to God, it's like, okay, do I fully agree with it? Probably not, but that's fine that there are those people. But what I see more often than not are the former that I just mentioned, is these people that are so devoutly Catholic and all of this, but they're horrible. I don't want to say horrible people but the way that they live their lives is not in integrity. They don't treat other people well. They are riddled with illness because of all this emotional stuff that they won't deal with. Yeah. And even I know Isaac's had, he mentioned the one pastor that turned out to be gay and his wife left him and he was living this lie. And then he had someone in the church that was like a cocaine addict.
It was I think he was worship leader, but he was the drummer for the band for the church. And we used to work for him painting houses. And I remember hearing him sniffing really loud in a bathroom one time, had no idea what it was. And later I realized, he's doing coke in the church, in the bathroom, as we were like about to paint something. I'm just like, and I really don't judge that guy either. I feel for him and I feel for his family. He's got, had some young kids at the time and he's going through his struggles, but the church leaves them not intentionally all the time. I'm confused by that, but I think it's ignorance. They don't know how to free themselves. They don't know the freedom that they can truly walk in. They just say, give it to God or Jesus, just love Jesus, and Jesus' love will cover you. Like, these are things that I've heard my whole life that do nothing for me. It's like, oh, I've got this problem. What do I do? Well, just give it to God. Okay. But what do I do?
Yeah.
Like, how do you end the cycle?
Well, and that's...
Oh, you don't. You're not powerful enough. You can't do it. I've literally been told that. You can't do it. Only God can do it.
Well, because it's still outsourcing, isn't it? Everything in religion is about outsourcing your own power.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing is, they've got to validate why they're necessary. Right? So as long as you keep needing them, that validates them. And so there's two things that happen here. Number one, a lot of people go to churches because they believe it's the only place that they will be accepted, right? Church is meant to be accepting. Well, it isn't. That's another lie, because, if you don't fit their mold, you're ostracized. And the other thing is, churches and religion will not teach you how to get free, because it's not in their interest for you to be free. It's not in the principality that rules over religion and New Age in a lot of way that will set you free. They want you coming for their programs. They want you coming for, church every Sunday to get that that connection with God. A lot of people think they can only find God in a church building. And that's the biggest lie, because he's right here with us right now. He's everywhere. And that's what they don't teach.
Yeah.
They teach that he's a God that's far away. They even write songs about God being far away. Well, that's not my experience, and it's not a lot of other people's experience too. I'm not the only one. So this is where, again, it's that distance, that programming of, well, you have to do this, then maybe God will hear your prayer. And then if God doesn't answer your prayers, it's your fault because you don't have enough faith. They haven't taught you the right way to pray. They haven't shown you how to actually connect with God in the true sense, not, God, here's my shopping list, or this is what I need. He already knows what you need. So, and if you see it in the Spirit, you already have it. So these are the things that are not taught. They don't want you to know that. They don't want to know that you can actually roll around on the floor laughing because you are enjoying God's presence in such a way that it's fun. They don't want you to have fun, because it says scripturally, a merry heart makes the person whole. If we have joy, if we have fun, it's like medicine. They don't want us to have medicine. They want us to have pharmaceuticals. What does the word pharmaceutical mean? In the Greek, it means witchcraft and sorcery. Yep. So see how we're entwined with all this witchcraft and this control and this manipulation that we need to break out of. We're a society that's taught to go to the doctors, and whatever the doctor says, it's the truth. If we send our kids to school, well, if the teacher's teaching it, it's truth. It's not. All of these departments all working together under the 5 hierarchials that I said: Catholic Church, the Freemasons, the Mormons, the Satanists, and the Cabal. That's why we want to create a new world, right? We've got to come out from under their BS, and we've got to start setting up our own structures that bring truth with the right intent. This is what we love about the Living Free movement. We're not trying to tear down the old structure. We're just saying, listen, people, there's another way of doing life. Free will, it's your choice.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are some ways that you can show people or explain how to pray or how to connect to God in the way that you're describing?
Okay, so there's a couple. It's really funny what just popped into my head then, because this is the Catholic teaching. Like, before you pray, it's like, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. Right? That's the beginning of the prayer.
Wow.
Right.
They're like, where did that come from? It's like, these are the programmings. But it's, to me, prayer. The word prayer means communication. Right? So what's happened is the word prayer has become religiousized. It's like, okay, let us pray. Okay. I'm in communication with God all the time. Right? So sometimes I'm doing things and he'll just start talking to me and I'm like, oh, okay, that's really cool. It's just very, very simple. And a lot of people, they've got their shopping list and they're complaining. They go, oh, God, I've got this illness and, I need this to happen and I don't like my job. And there are some things that God just says, you have the power to change that. If you don't like your job, go find a new one. But there's this mentality that's been taught that, well, if I ask God, God's just going to magically pick me up and put me over here and it's all going to be done for me. This is this instant gratification. This is that drive-through programming that we've been taught, that fast food aspect that we've been taught. It's not about the formulas. It's about your heart. It's about the intention of your heart. And this is where we just are in simple communication. Now, some people, feel that they need a formula because they're still growing their relationship with God. Okay? So, look, I had a situation where one day God spoke to me. I was cleaning the house, right? And I'm just thinking about the things of the Spirit. And all of a sudden God says to me, he goes, you think I'm passive. And I was like, what? I was like, I don't even use that word. So I stopped in my tracks and I went, I think that you're passive. And deep down in my inner core, it was truth. And I went, yeah, I do actually. And I said, you take a long time to answer my prayers. And he goes, and this is what he said to me. He said, you think I'm passive because your father was passive. And it hit me. It was like chains just broke off me in the spirit, like things just shifted. And I went, yes, I do. This was my underlying perspective of God. But I wasn't aware of that. It wasn't intentional. It was a deep programming that he revealed. And from that moment on, my prayer life, if you want to call it that, just went to a different realm. And it was like I had this open heaven, because some people go, I feel like my prayers hit the ceiling, like they're not getting through, or it's like the heavens are brass. These are some of the explanations. There's a reason for that. So this is getting to the root issue. Why does it feel like that? Now, I had a gentleman come to me he says, I feel like I've just got this glass ceiling all the time when I want to go in the spirit. Very open, very lovely person, connected to God. And I said, oh, have you got Freemasonry in your family? And he went, nah. I went, you sure about that? And then he goes, oh, yeah, actually, my great-grandfather was a Rosicrucian.
Oh, wow.
I went, mate, let me tell you that Rosicrucians are part of Freemasonry. And we had to shatter that because that was a spiritual cap because of a generational actions. This is why I'm big about dealing with generational things and healing traumas, breaking the curses. There are things that we are not even aware of in our family that stop us from being successful, stop us from coming into the fulfillment of entering into the things of the spirit, right? And part of religion is constantly getting us to contract with them so they can curse us. So this is the awareness that needs to come out, is that we, and what am I actually contracting with? What am I agreeing with? when you step into a church, they're not churches, they're actually temples. They're temples that idolize Baal and Astra. And they are some of the principalities under the Queen of Heaven, which is referred to as the Queen of Darkness. Now, she is Lucifer's right-hand woman, and she's the one that's orchestrating a lot of stuff. That's how it is in the spirit. But let me say this, there is a heavenly angelic, powers and principalities that oversee these. It's just we don't engage with them. We don't ask them to come onto the earth. Remember, we have dominion. Lucifer is here by default. He has got us hoodwinked to think that he's in control of the earth. And that's what we need to flip. And that's why every circumstance you face, every situation you face, you need to bring God over it, and you stay over it, not under it. That's why we need to deal with our issues. We need to break free so that he doesn't have a legal right to keep us bound.
Yeah.
Everything has to be done lawfully. That's why Satan gets us to contract with him, because then he has a legal right to access us.
The the Queen of Heaven thing is very interesting. My sister's Catholic Church separated from the Vatican in the 60s or whatever, after Vatican II, they call it. I don't know what that means. I could explain some of it, but basically the rules changed. They stopped doing the Latin Mass, and there were some other things that changed. So they separated. And so they consider themselves the OG Catholics. And they call Mary the Queen of Heaven.
Oh, wow.
And they worship Mary, although they don't say that. But they always pray to Mary. And they just built during COVID, during that whole cosmic ritual, they just built in St. Mary's, Kansas. They live in St. Mary's. Beautiful little town. Very, very, I love the town, but they built this massive cathedral there. And on the top of it is a giant statue of Mary, the Queen of Heaven, that they call the Queen of Heaven. So what is, like, where does that come from in the spirit? As I've never heard of it as Lucifer's right-hand gal. So that's shocking and curious.
Okay, so Revelations 18 talks about coming out of Babylon, and that's where it refers to the Queen of Heaven. And this is where unpacking what we're coming out of, right? Because Revelations 18 is just full of so much information that we need to unpack, because that's exactly what we're coming out of. We are coming out of the Babylonian rulership, right, which is the Queen of Heaven, the Queen of Darkness. And she's actually, all the principalities that operate under her are all in Scripture. So they do refer to all of these principalities, like the Leviathan spirit is another one, the Jezebel spirit. The thing is, churches touch on the Jezebel spirit, but they always refer it to a woman that is strong or, can organize, or, what they deem as controlling. It's like, oh, you're a Jezebel spirit. They don't even know what they're talking about, because a Jezebel spirit is a principality. So, they are misquoting even how they deal with demonic, in the demonic realm. And I've seen this, I don't know if you've seen this, Isaac, it's like, they want to do a deliverance, and it's like the louder you yell is when you're going to have impact.
Right.
And the more the person's throffing on the floor, or, twisting and screaming, there's that drama thing, everyone's like, oh, we're getting the demon out. They're not. They absolutely are not. They are traumatizing that person. When I deal with demons and entities in principalities, they have to come out on a breath. They are not allowed to make a show. They are not allowed to draw attention to themselves. They have to go when I tell them, and that's the end of it. And there's a big difference, because a lot of the churches, especially the evangelical and especially in Africa, you know, they want the show. And because it, you know what? It elevates the man. It elevates the person that's casting out the demon. And I do not agree with that at all. And I've had to, you know, help people get healed from the trauma of their so-called deliverance. And this is where it lacks teaching, because you do not want to clean out a house if they're not prepared to maintain it. You're going to make it 10 times worse. So there's situations where people will go, oh, you know, can you give me help? And I won't touch it because they're not ready for it. They're not ready for that entity to be dealt with. They need understanding. They need a deeper relationship with God. And I found that God is well able to get rid of these things without human intervention. This is part of the trickery, is that they make us believe that God needs man intervention to do anything, right? That's what religion teaches. Do we partner with God? Absolutely. Do we need to partner with God to bring his will and his purpose onto the earth? Absolutely. But I have learnt, when he shows me something in the spirit and I go, okay, what do you want me to do with that? He says nothing. He says, I've shown you, now I can do something. Big difference. Sometimes he'll go, I need you to do something, and I'll do it. But it's not always about us doing the work. It's about that connection in the spirit and releasing it onto the earth.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things I've learned over the last year more so, is that these demonic attachments or these negative entities, whatever people want to call them, I kind of thought that, you know, because I've kind of spent the last few years especially really, I would say deepening my connection to God, sort of figuring out what spirituality is to me. Because like I mentioned earlier, I didn't grow up religious, but because I didn't really grow up with any grounding in any particular religion or philosophy, I actually spent a lot of my life not knowing who God was or how to connect or who I was in relation to God. Like, I was very lost for a lot of my life. And I think that's why I suffered with mental health issues from quite a young age, because I didn't have this sense of belonging. And and so for me, and then coming up to in my early 20s, that's when I found this group called the Brahma Kumaris, who have some beautiful teachings, but I now look and it's very new age. It's very, everything's love and light, and they teach you, you know, just positive, think positive and all this stuff. And there's no, I mean, I didn't even know at that time what shadow work was, but there's no dealing with your issues. It's very one-sided. And, interesting when you said like these stories of people that have been addicts or prostitutes and they tell their stories, and you said they never really stay. That's what I felt with this particular group. Like, when I first found them, changed my life. It was phenomenal. And I learned a lot of really good stuff from them, but I just did the pendulum swing again. Then I went, and then I was like, I started partying and doing like worse than ever before after that period of time. Yeah. So it wasn't really solving any problems. And so for me, and I forgot where I was going with that. What were we talking about just before? Because I was going to tie this to something else.
Demon.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So in the last few years, so I thought, learning about all these demonic entities and stuff, like, I need to go to someone and I need help to get rid of these things. And I did actually see someone, and you and I had a conversation about that afterwards, Dotti. And the more I've deepened my connection with God and learned from people like yourself and people like Rachel Vaughan that are teaching this stuff, I learned that we have the power to get rid of these things. And it's very, like you said, it's very simple. I find that like the things of God, what's the word? Like, there's so much wonder and unknowing, but there's an awe. Yeah. And there's a lot of this unknowing, but then there's so much simplicity even in the things that you don't know. It's just simple stuff. Like, these entities, if you feel them, And Isaac and I have both had experiences with this where we'll feel these things around us. And it's as simple as, I mean, I've heard of lots of different techniques, but it's as simple as, one, telling them to go. You have dominion over your body, and just telling them to leave. You can imagine them dissolving in gold light or white light. You can send them unconditional love because they can't exist in the frequency of love, and then they just go. So yeah, and that's what I love about what you teach. It's about taking that power back, that we don't need to go to other people. And in saying that, there's a time and a place for that. Like, obviously you help people through this stuff, because sometimes, especially when you're breaking free of religious programming or new age programming and you don't really know where to go from there, people such as yourself can be so, so helpful. But it really is, the end goal is to, you know, and I'm like this in the way I practice with working with people. I don't want people to see me forever. I don't want to be their crutch and come to me and I'll fix all your problems. It's about empowering them to do that for themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it is, you know, the thing is, if you feel that there is something, you know, that is not right, it's the other question to ask is, okay, why does it think that it has a right to be there? Right? Because somewhere there's an agreement.
Yeah.
So this is what, going back to how you see yourself and how letting God show you how he sees you is really, really important, because often we contract through a lie and we agree. Now, I'll give you another quick example, is that my mum always told me I was fat and ugly and I was worth nothing, right? My entire life. And, you know, basically till the day she passed away. And one day I was standing at the mirror and I heard this entity say, "You're fat and you're ugly." Now, it doesn't matter how skinny I got, I was still always fat, right? That was the perception that I had of myself. And, you know, because we're into, you know, presentation and how we look and all that sort of thing. But anyway, I heard it here and I went, hang on a minute, because I realized it was an entity. It wasn't just my mum's voice. It was an entity that was partnering with her to continue this program. She'd passed away. So this was the continuation of this lie. And I stopped and I looked at it and I just went, that's a lie and you cannot say this to me anymore. And I've never heard it since. That's all I did, because I acknowledged that it was a lie. It was something that I had accepted, because when your mother tells you you're fat and ugly and you're not worth anything, you believe it because they're your parents. They're the ones that are supposed to be protecting you and nurturing. So what they say is truth. And this is why, as parents, it's detrimental on how we speak to our kids and the words that we say, not just to our kids, but to one another. So it was, and I've never heard that again. It's like, it was an absolute lie, because that's not how God sees me either. You know, do I wish I was a bit thinner? Yeah, well, I can do something about that. Do you know what I mean? Like, some people pray to get, you know, God, make me skinny, but they're eating McDonald's and chips and chocolate. Like, what? And then they go, God doesn't answer my prayers. And I'm like, well, what's your part of it? What?
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing about these demonic entities and things like this that become attached. They have to have a foothold. So they can't just come out of nowhere. So if you've got, you know, generational stuff, if you've got an insecurity, if you've got, they just have to have one little thing where they can, you know, hook the claw in. And yeah, it is as simple as not only telling them to leave, but also then, you know, again, it always comes back to dealing with your own issues. So if there's an insecurity that you've had, like actually looking at that and being like, okay, well, where did this come from? Why do I see myself like this? What can I change? How can I view myself? You know, and I love that you always say that, like the way that God sees us, because I think, like, again, just in my own experience, for so much of my life, not knowing what God was, who he was, how he sees me, I saw myself in a really negative light for a lot of my life. And, and this is coming from someone who I didn't have any significant abuse or trauma in my childhood. I grew up, my parents are still together. I grew up in this stable home. And, the way I used to see myself, there was this huge disconnect. And I think that's why, because now the way, that I have this connection with God, that's how I always see, like, God created us in his image, and to view ourselves negatively is to view God negatively.
Yep. That's really well put. And that's exactly right. And that's why the influences on our life are the ones that we then see life through. So, if you've been, and this is all tied up with, our energy and our frequency as well, is that if we've been brought up abused, then we expect to be abused, right? So we set ourselves up. So we self-sabotage because that's the cycle of it. So I just want to clarify something here is that, generational curses and traumas that get passed down, it's not so much that the child is now being punished for the past generational actions or, I hate to use the word sin, but, actions. It's actually the effect on the family's DNA and the family's spiritual blueprint that needs to be set free from that. So often people go, I'm being punished because of, past generations. That's not it. It's actually the effects of their actions or their vows or their oaths, right? Because that's what Freemasonries do. That's what every church does. You're making an oath, whether you realize it or not. And that's what we're, on the workshop wanting to start to reveal, that we need to take that off our being so that we're free. It's same as that root issue that I thought God was passive. And why? Because my dad was a lovely man. When I found out who my real dad was, he was a lovely man. He was so patient and kind and generous, like talk about the fruits of the Spirit. But to me, he was passive because he never protected me from my mum. So that's how I saw him as passive, because he would just do whatever she said. And, I just go, well, come on, man up. You're supposed to protect me, but you don't. So that was the whole, story in that programming that I carried. And God's so gracious that he'll show you. I don't go looking for stuff. I don't need to, because I know that he'll show me what I need to deal with. And this is the other thing that a lot of workshops or retreats do. They've got you looking and going after things. And sometimes it's not the right time for them to be dealt with. So they're dealt with prematurely, which then has a repercussion again. So, it's about really being in full union with God and walking with him and being guided and directed by him, because he'll lead you. He will lead you. He will not, again, if you go into scripture, like Psalm 28 and Psalm 98, they're incredible. You don't read it like a book. Like when you read a scripture, sit and look at that verse and let it become a portal of truth to you. If it doesn't resonate, go to the next one. But I've read the Bible back front to back, but that's not how it speaks to me. It just becomes another book. It's when I pick it up and the words jump off the page and it becomes truth for me. My spirit connects to it. I go, yeah, that's me. That's what God's saying to me. But as you mature, you actually don't need the scriptures as much because you're having this direct dialogue. Right? So, and there are times that God will give me scripture and I go, I remember what this says. But most of the time we're just in this direct dialogue. But that's how you grow in it. So if you're new to this, please don't read the Bible as a storybook. Let it become alive. Let it let it just speak to you where it wants to speak to you. And always please start in the New Testament, because the New Testament is full of spiritual truth and lots of spiritual laws that are applicable to us today.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many good things in there. There's other books out there as well that are very interesting that were pulled out of the Bible.
Well, the Book of Enoch's made a resurgence. Lots of people talking about that at the moment.
Great book. Absolutely fantastic book. And that's very on par, because we're talking about the Nephilim. We're talking about, how the heck does Satan still have rule and reign on the earth when it's supposed to have been dealt with, So the Book of Enoch's great. I love the Book of Enoch.
Yeah.
Well, I love some of his experiences. I go, yeah, I want that too.
Yeah, it really just opens you up to a bit more of an expanded view of what this realm is and what else is out there. I remember reading it. I've read it several times, and it describes other realms between here and heaven. Even there's more than one. It's not just heaven, like one thing. It's like there's levels to it. There's layers. There's different aspects of it. There's other places with different plant and animal life. It sounds like trees that have these beautiful aromas and stuff. And it's just very curious stuff.
There are so many different realms in the spirit, and they're really fun to go and explore. And they're really fun when you kind of, you step into them for the first time, and it's like, wow. And they change your life as well, because you're in the spiritual realm. So, your spirit becomes more alive in that. Like, the world is a beautiful place. There's aspects of the world that's really lovely, and I enjoy the beach and, the trees and things like that. But the things of the spirit excite me so much more. I'm happy to live out there. And have those adventures. And this is where, again, I want to touch on, a lot of the New Age movement is very similar to the Jesuit spiritual teaching. And it is all about creation, right? It's not about the creator. Yeah. And this is where whatever religion or whatever you're into, if it brings you into a oneness with the creator, and that awareness grows, then you're on the right path. As long as you don't have to go through a hierarchical, guru to get to it, because we can go direct. It's very important that people realize that. And they start to trust their intuition. They start to trust their spirit guiding them and directing them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you mentioned the New Age. And honestly, I really wanted to get into that, but I feel like we could do a whole other podcast on that, because a whole other episode, because there's so much to say about that too. I think there's a lot of pendulum swinging that goes on, especially for people that leave religion. You see this quite often, especially I've heard some stories from people leaving the Mormon church. And then they just do this pendulum swing, and they end up in these same sort of structures and, hierarchical organizations, or just where they've, the guru thing, because that's really big in the New Age realm. And again, it's still taking people away. And because the other point I want to make too is that within religion and New Age, there are still truths, but they're either inverted or manipulated into something else. And that's how, you say Lucifer works. That's how Satan works, is that there has to be a nugget of truth, because they can't say an outright lie under natural law. So there has to be the nugget of truth, but then they invert it somehow, or they manipulate it in a way where, you put it perfectly, where there's almost like this roof over you and you can't break through that. You just sit within here. It's very, restrictive in a way. And again, when you look at what God truly is, God is expansive. God wants us to ask questions. He wants us to expand into what he is. And religion and New Age just don't speak to that whatsoever.
And while you look at it let's look at it this way. In religion, look at their, you know, they have their little statues of Mary, which actually I didn't get to answer that question, is that Mary in the Catholic Church is actually the Queen of Darkness, the Queen of Heaven. You know, she's got a number of names, and I'm working on a presentation on this to really, really unpack who she is and how she's operating. So you've got your crosses, you've got, you know, all those, what do you call it? All the talisman and trinkets and things like that. Well, on the New Age side, you've got your crystals and you've got your pendants and you've got and the thing is, they're the same. It's just, people are starting to move here, so we'll move them over here. People need to realize it doesn't mean that God can't use those avenues to actually connect with you. But if you stay under their hierarchical rulership, you will be deceived.
Yeah.
So, because that's the whole plan. We're coming out of this deception. And I had a vision probably about 6 years ago where, you know, God showed me, he said, people are going to leave the churches in the masses, and then they're going to leave New Age in the masses. And he said, and then there's a new flow. There's a new way of doing this. And this is something I've, you know, been percolating in my spirit going, well, what does this look like? And I've had lots of conversations with Dave going, you know, Dave, I'm seeing this, but I'm not seeing this middle vein of what the flow is. I know what it is in the spirit, but how do we help direct people into the truth of this? And in the end, God turned around and he says, I'll show you what it isn't. And I went, okay, that's a great place to start. And that's exactly what's happening. We're having conversations where I'm going, well, it isn't religion and it isn't New Age, but we're coming into this, I feel we're coming into this beautiful, innocent and pure flow of spirit with direct connection to God. And that we are going to be people of incredible integrity and honor, and we are really heartfelt people. So that's part of what I'm seeing that it is. But, you know, because I've gone through this process of, well, you know, what I've seen what it does in the church. I've looked at the New Age. I've tried to be open to what New Age presents in that, okay, people need their crystals. I get it. You know, people need their crosses. I get it. But that's still a lesser encounter in the spirit. Like it's still, what's the word? It's like, it's still a substandard level that we can actually encounter with God directly.
Yeah. And just for our listeners, you were referring to speaking to Dave Armstrong from the Living Free movement, because obviously you're very involved with the LFM. And and that's I'm glad that you mentioned him, because that's what I was going to say. That's what I love about the Living Free movement, is this community of people that have experienced either religion or New Age spirituality and have come out of that because they see through the deception. And that's what I love about our community, is that everyone's on their own journey. People are at different stages, but they are coming more into this true connection to God. And you can see that how it's playing out in their lives, and, you know, not just in the work that they do, but just who they are as people. And they're these people are a joy to be around. So yeah, it's really beautiful to see.
Yeah.
It is. It's lovely. It's very precious. And I think there's big things ahead. I just think that we're very pivotal, particularly at the very first festival that we had was in the spirit, was monumental. And it was the beginning of something really extraordinary. And I'm holding that in the spirit because I know that God wants to build on that. And, you know, it accepted people from whatever background. And people came and learnt not just about the things of the spirit, but they learn about how to be practical and how about health and, you know, how the truth of everything. This is what I love, because we're not just stuck in one conversation or one topic, where it's multiverse. We're talking to different people, like Rachel Vaughan, you know, doing ley lines. doing the different workshops, Narita with her frequency, people that are doing the gardens and people that are building sustainable houses. And, so it's just awesome. It's a full package. And you know what? This is what I love about God. God is well-rounded. He doesn't, you can only do this. God likes to have fun as well. So some people we go to church and we just do our God thing and then we do the rest of the week without him. I'm going, man, you're so missing out on the richness of the spirit and of the personality and the character of God, because he likes to have fun. And, I've played many a basketball game with God right there and done fluky 3-pointers that people went, that naturally should not have happened. Do you know what I mean? This is the world that we can tap into, that it's supernatural. Or, going out on a jet ski and yahooing around and, having fun. He enjoys that. So this is where we've got to shake off this religiousness that it's, and why have we got a head bowed? Who are we actually bowing to in these temples? Yet to be revealed. That's going to rock some socks.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect segue because we'll wrap up, but I'd love for you to share with our audience the workshop that we've got planned. I've been helping Dotti plan this so to speak, no pun intended, but this quite immersive workshop where you've actually got 2 teaching calls before an actual immersion, a water immersion. So, if you just want to explain to the audience what this workshop's all about and why you felt so called to do this now.
Well, it's time for us to become more aware of their tactics on how they keep us shut down, and particularly exposing some of the religious rituals that we embark on. And they manipulate us through fear, like water baptism and that infant baptism, like it's based on the fear of if you don't get that child baptized, if they died, they're not going to make it to heaven. Like, hello, biggest lie ever.
And that they're born in sin and you have to do it because they're born in sin, which is such a load of rubbish.
Yeah, like how can a child be born in sin when they're so pure and innocent? So I want to expose their words that they use and their entrapment, and then the contracts that we make and who we're making it with, because it's not the one true God. And that's and then I want to take people into being more aware of what the buildings actually represent as well. And then the immersion day is that if people wish to have an immersion, with us, they can physically come and do that. But I also want to say you don't actually have to do it that way because you can do it yourself. And that's really important because it's not about, again, like coming to Dotti and getting this immersion and getting all these things dealt with. We want to empower you with truth and facilitate that so that you can grow in who you were designed to be. So, it's coming out of living from default, which is what they've told us we are, and coming into living your true design, which is how God made you. So this is the transition that we're all in. And it doesn't stop, but it just gets more and more fun.
Absolutely.
That. Yeah, that's something that's been on my mind as you're describing having fun and all this stuff. That describes my experience when I've felt connected to God. Was what Jesus said in the Bible, said something to the effect of, let the children come to me, because if you're not like a little children, like a child, you can't go into the kingdom of heaven. Yeah. And when I take that to mean, when he talks about the kingdom of heaven, I don't think of that as when you die and you go to heaven. I mean, right now in the present moment, if you're with this joy and wonder and purity of heart, you can go into the kingdom of heaven whenever you want.
Well, isn't there a saying? I always remember this from the movie Stigmata, but it might even be written in the Bible, that the kingdom of heaven is within us and all around us. Yeah. And that's always stuck with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Or scripture it says the kingdom is at hand. In other words, it's in your hands.
Yeah.
So, you whatever you put your hand to, that's what you're manifesting around you. And it's like, what I love about that scripture, Isaac, is that that's the simplicity and the innocence that we can come before God and just be really childlike. And that's when life is great, because it's simple. It's not complicated. There's no weight to it. It's just fun. If you watch a kid and they're playing, they don't have a care in the world. They're just enjoying what they're doing. That's how we're meant to live. And that's how God wants us to live.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I could talk to you for hours on this topic, Dotti. We both could, because Isaac and I have had very different experiences growing up with, like I said, more, Isaac's more on the side of religion. I've been more on the side of like New Age in my experiences. And there's just so much to be said about it. Like, yeah, we could easily do it. I think we'll definitely get you on again. I'd love to have you on to do your presentation on the Queen of Heaven. I find that really fascinating. And so for anyone that wants to work with you, do you want to just let them know your details, how they can work with you? I'll put all the links in the show notes, and especially for the workshop, which this will come out on Wednesday. The following day, Thursday, the 27th, will be the first teaching. The week after that will be the second teaching. And then the immersion, the actual day of immersion, will be Saturday, the 12th of April. So if anyone's interested, just, check out the links in the show notes. But where can people find you?
Okay, so you can find me on the Living Free platform, as well as I have a webpage called www.spiritreality.org. That's where I'm offering people different services if they want to have a one-to-one, energy healing, clearing, generational things. If there's things that you're aware of that you feel that are hindering you, or you keep tripping over them, or it's like the same scenario, then let's go into the spirit and see what the root issue is. And deal with that so that you can move forward and keep growing. So there's a number of different services there that I offer that people can just send a link through on the platform.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it was
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I hope people got a lot of interesting insights from this and weren't too terribly triggered, but I have a feeling that the people that are meant to find this will. And I'm excited for what flowers from this. This is going to be, it has been, and it's going to continue to be an amazing unfolding.
Yep. Well, I'm happy to come back and present the Queen of Heaven, but will rock people's socks, that's for sure.
That's what we want, Dotti.
Let's dig into it. Yeah, we'll set that up for a future date.
Yeah, for sure.
Coming soon.
Yeah.
All right. Good on you guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Love you too.
Thank you for listening or watching this show. If you got anything out of this, there's probably a lot more in the other episodes that you haven't seen that have amazing gold nuggets in it. Things from our lives that we experienced, freedom that's opening up. I used to be very angry, having failed relationship after failed relationship, multiple divorces, going to jail, almost losing my rights a couple of times. And now I'm just living an amazing life with a beautiful partner in Australia, living an adventure with more hope than I ever thought possible. And the methods and techniques and thought processes and healings that I went through are talked about in all these episodes.
Yeah. And for me, I suffered with a lot of mental health issues that also stemmed into issues with drugs and alcohol and, issues with my body and getting breast implants and then having them removed. And all of those were really just catalysts for change. They were opportunities for growth. And a lot of what we share on this podcast and the people that we have on have either had something to do with our journey of healing or we've just learnt from. And really all of the topics that we explore here at Natural AF are always coming back to discovering who we truly are and living in that truth and being natural AF.
So check out all of our previous episodes wherever you listen to or watch this podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one.
See you next time, guys.